Good evening, everyone. On behalf of LEAD, I'm very glad to welcome you all in our leadership interaction of the 8th Annual LEAD Awards 2020. Before we move on to the session, I'll give you all a quick brief about LEAD. LEAD is an acronym for Leadership Enrichment for Adolescents through Assessment and Development. Its vision is nurturing new generation leaders, and mission is fostering leadership amongst adolescents by providing opportunities to discover, develop, demonstrate their unique abilities for creating and sustaining ethical leadership in society. After 3 years of intense research by a team of psychologists, the LEAD framework was developed. This framework is based on the Positive Youth Development Framework of Richard Lerner. LEAD aims to develop leadership capabilities amongst adolescents through 4 dimensions of competence, collaboration, character, and confidence. Started in 2013, LEAD has already extended its programs to more than 30,000 students. Most of these programs are now available in virtual variant as well. Some of these programs, as you can see on the screens, are Teenopine. Teenopine is a weekly program to give students a platform to share their ideas, views, and opinions on current topics. Mentopine is a series of webinars where experts share their knowledge on various unconventional topics, and it's also held weekly. To get the regular updates of the weekly Teenopine and Mentopine sessions, you can join our WhatsApp group. We will shortly share the link of the WhatsApp group in chat. And today, we have gathered here for another such program, which is called Leadership Interaction and is part of the 8th Annual LEAD Awards. LEAD Awards is the most awaited event organized every year since 2013 for students of 8th to 12th grade, where students from all over India from different schools compete on one platform. Students go through 6 different stages that challenges them to develop their skills and gives them real-life exposure. The session that we are here today for aims to help students understand leadership from the perspective of the current leaders. To take the session forward, I would request Mr. Samir Parekh, founder and chairman of LEAD, to take over the stage.
Thank you. Thanks, Shivani, for a wonderful, crisp introduction of LEAD program, and it's in no way represents the impact that you, as a team, the entire team is creating on the society through LEAD initiatives. It's an amazing job, Captain, that this whole team is doing under the leadership of Drumit, Shivani, Siddhi, and Dipti, and backed by Naman Group, about 45 members team. And the entire team is highly committed to this process, not just as part of our corporate social responsibility, but also as part of the personal social responsibility that every one of them is demonstrating. So proud of the team, and thank you, Shambhavi, also for hosting this wonderful platform. Thanks, Shardul, for amazing support that we have got until now. And yes, now Captain Raman, Captain, I have no words to express my sincere gratitude to you, because since the 5th LEAD Awards that you were there as chief guest for the LEAD Award ceremony, we received several requests to have you amongst us and share some of your thoughts, your experiences, your wisdom, and in a way inspire the young generation. As you know, LEAD works with young generation leaders. And today's this particular leadership interaction, which is part of the process of 8th LEAD Awards, this particular webcast is attended by several hundred people, which is primarily consisting of students from 8th to 12th grade, parents and educators. So I think this is important to know the group which is attending this. And we have participants who are of 8th LEAD Awards, and some of them sent their questions. We shortlisted them, and we'll be asking few questions from that during this fireside chat, and which is a primarily leadership interaction with you. But also we'll be inviting questions from the audience. Only the select questions, because we have just 1 hour and we'll be managing during that time. Friends and the entire audience which is here, although Captain Raman doesn't need any introduction, I must say that he has a unique career profile spanning across 4 decades that has enabled him to learn, practice, and teach principles of organizational dynamics, people dynamics, team dynamics, leadership dynamics, strategy, transformations, and the mindset shift. And I think today that we are in a scenario, there is this particular aspect of mindset is really coming under scanner, and we all need to lead in this complex and ever changing world. It is now changing at a rate which none of us ever imagined. Of course, Captain Raman was a founding CEO of National Intelligence Grid, and in his last corporate role, he was the group president of security, risk, and new venture with Reliance Industries. A well sought after speaker, delivered several keynotes, several sessions, several workshops for global audiences. Incidentally, Captain Raman, recently I was attending one of your sessions where you were, along with others, you were also there on the People Matters platform. And he's associated with top-tier business schools and government institutions. And of course, I would say great supporter of LEAD Awards and the LEAD initiative, and therefore he's here, and therefore he accepted our invite to be here and share his thoughts. So thank you very much, Captain, once again for being here. And I would like to start by asking the very first question. We are in this world of pandemic. I think everyone is now enveloped by pandemic. So we are not talking about pandemic, but the impact of pandemic has certainly created new rules of leadership. What do you think you would like to give? I mean, how would you give your perspective about what is leadership in this era of pandemic? What do you think?
So, firstly, Samir, thank you very much for your very, very kind words and for your kind invitation to come back to LEAD. And I'm very grateful for all the parents, students, and teachers who are listening in. Very similar crowd as it was during that time when I was there in LEAD, the 5th Awards. So thank you once again for inviting me. I think your question is fairly pertinent because this event which has happened, it has often been compared to something like the Second World War or the First World War, or a global event where it is a catastrophe which has hit everybody in the globe simultaneously. And in that kind of an environment, very often it's wise to look back at instances where similar situations have occurred in the past. For example, to take the example of the Second World War itself. And during that time, there was entire cities that were bombed. There were families that were separated. I think anyone who was living in Europe at that point of time, there wasn't a single family which had a situation where they were spared from this situation. You will have to excuse me. My young boy wants to go out. As I mentioned to you up front, he'll become frisky after a little while. Just give me a second back. Yeah, sorry about that. So I told Samirji before we began that I've got a dog who has his own timings and unfortunately does not adhere to webinar timings. So sorry about that. So if we were to take a comparison of, let's say, an event like the Second World War or any Holocaust which has happened, or like an earthquake which happened in Gujarat or which happened in Latur, entire communities were destroyed. Entire families were orphaned. There wasn't, I don't think, a single person in Europe in the 40s who, by 1 or 2 degrees of separation, has not lost some loved one. When you compare it to the crisis like that, what is happening right now, you have to put it in perspective. I think one of the first jobs of leaders, whoever they may be parents, they may be teachers, they may be elder siblings. It is their job to look at a crisis and put it in perspective. That is the first job of a leader, to calm people down and say, "Theek hai, it's happening, it's okay, we'll deal with it." But it is not life ending. Until life ends, nothing is life ending. And I think providing that sense of calm, while recognizing that the situation is pretty serious. I mean, we can look at entire batches of students who are going to pass out, not necessarily those who are in school, but definitely those who are in college. Especially those who are in B schools, especially those who have taken loans to finish their studies in B schools and were anticipating that after they finish their B school, they'll be hired by a company. Several million such children or young people all over the world are going to face a very, very hard few years. I don't think this is something that is going to end in a few quarters. It is something that is likely to stretch over a period of time. So I think we must recognize that there is a crisis, no doubt about it. But at the same time, as a very famous saying goes, nothing is as good or as bad as it seems at first. And when we start putting things in perspective and looking at, okay, fine, yes, there is COVID, the disease, and that is causing casualties. And by now, I think we have gone well into the life cycle of the disease for pretty much everyone who is on this webinar to have at least one person whom they know personally who has been affected, and in some cases being affected fatally. So it is very much, there's no doubt about it. But at the same time, it is also to be put in perspective that this is the crisis of the disease, but there is going to be a bigger crisis in terms of the economic impact it is going to have, the distraction from regular economic activity, full-fledged activity that would have happened in the last 2 quarters, which has not happened, and the rebuilding process that is required. Now, for rebuilding, a sense of optimism is required. A sense of, yes, we can do this is required. For tackling a disease or a crisis, a seriousness is required. So I think a leader's job right now, whether it's a parent, a teacher, would be to create an environment in which, while we recognize, yes, there is a serious issue that is happening and life is altered in many ways forever, but at the same time, we will have to go through this crisis and rebuild, just like generations in the past have done. I mean, today, if you go to Gujarat, you go exactly the same place where there was an earthquake maybe 20 years ago, 2 decades ago, and you look at that place, it looks, I mean, nobody would believe that they were. So the coming generations or the coming people, they rebuild on the crisis of the past and they redevelop it. And hopefully, this will also act as a very strong lesson for us at various different levels. It will act as a lesson for us to know what is really important in life. It will act as a lesson to remind us of the fragility of life itself, and therefore what should be important and what should not be important. It will enable us to appreciate the smaller things of life which we took for granted. It will, in many ways, I was talking to a group of students, B school students from a university who were graduated actually this year, and unfortunately they have hit a very depleted job market. So I was giving them this analogy that when we train athletes for international events, like Olympics or Asia, we train them in high altitude. They are sent to Leh, Ladakh, and that's where they train. And the reason for training them there is that they are trained with depleted oxygen. The oxygen there is less, body metabolism is slow. So it is like training a swimmer how to swim with an iron ball tied to his leg. Now, what happens is that they keep training there for months and months and months, and then they are brought back to sea level. And when they get into the competition at that point of time, they are now operating at much better their performance because they've been trained to operate with depleted resources. Now, in a way, that is the situation right now. So for a lot of the kids who will be entering into the job market or who are anticipating what they're going to be doing in some years from now or a couple of years from now, I think the mindset that has to go back to is how do we operate with the same efficiency in depleted resources when resources are depleted. And I think we'll be quite amazed to find the various different permutation combinations that develop out of a situation where options are limited. Innovation always comes when options are limited. Innovation very rarely happens when there is plenitude of resources. It always happens when there is a constriction of resources. So just like as we have seen platforms such as this one that we are on right now, or a platform like Zoom, which apparently is worth more than $1 billion, more than IBM today. It's interesting to see how a small technology company, which sort of did a loop around the older, bigger ones like Facebook Chat, Google Meet, Skype, Cisco Telepresence, just came around and became the number one, exactly in the same crisis, right? The crisis hit everybody, including that company.
Absolutely.
So obviously, that team must have been thinking slightly differently to be able to do something which the old giants. I mean, Skype has been around, Samirji, you would remember, for more than 10, 15 years.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
Skype fell by the wayside when the biggest opportunity for online communication began. So I think we need to learn the fact that while there is a crisis, we need to learn how to manage with depleted resources. And it's possible. There are several examples I can give you where organizations have very quickly, or even individuals have very quickly realized that this is not working, and therefore in this environment, this is something that we need to try, and they have found opportunities to do that.
In fact, Captain, if I may say here, one of the award participants, Dhruv Trivedi, he's an 8th grader, and he's working on a project of significance of adroitness. He is also asking a very interesting question and I'm just relating with when you are saying rebuilding on crisis and the way technology is giving us that advantage. And I will slightly tweak his question, although the question was, please explain your leadership journey. I would like you to address the whole aspect of the adroitness, means the skills, the techniques, okay? And especially the skill sets that today's generation needs to develop from leadership perspective. I'm not talking about functional skill sets. Do you suggest for young generation to look at the function? I mean, some of those leadership aspects which otherwise, as parents and educators, also we might have ignored all these years, because another challenge in India is there is a race for marks all the time. And therefore, the biggest challenge is, I'm sure all these several hundred kids who are participating in 8th LEAD Awards, even they must have faced that challenge of negotiating with their, stakeholders and role set members to participate in this particular process. Do you suggest any specific things for these students or for the educators and parents to promote among these young children so that they develop good leadership capabilities?
So I'll tell you a couple of thoughts that I have on the subject. The first part is that I think in many areas, COVID only accelerated what was going to happen anyway. So let's not kid ourselves that automation wasn't coming around, or artificial intelligence wasn't going to take away jobs, or the sense of ownership was going away and the sense of renting was happening. So real estate companies they were overloaded with inventory before COVID happened also. Jobs were reduced, the economy was good. So to pretend that this is happening because of COVID would be to mislead our next plan of action. This is a bit like festering anyway, so COVID just did the band-aid. So of course it hurt because it took it out in a band-aid, but none of these things which are happening right now, the shift that is happening to online sales, the comfort with which people have now adapted to online training, all of these things were due to happen anyway. And I think you and I have lived through a journey when organizations were being ERP'd, they were being SAP'd or whatever. And you saw that big struggle that happened to move from that Purana Bhai Khata to a digital one. And it was almost like switching on a light in a room full of rats, because there's so many things that were hidden in that manual system, whether it was a train booking system or anything else. And the moment automation came, that also had a huge pushback. So interestingly, I think changes that are taking place because of COVID is only a catalyst of COVID. These changes were due to take place anyway. So if any parent is thinking out there that my child's plan that I made for my child's education or whatever, it has suddenly gone haywire because of COVID, I don't think so. I think these things were going to happen anyway. Now, this education system of ours, I have a view on it, and I think that view is a view when I say the education system. The system includes the parents, the teachers, the potential employers, the kids, and many other stakeholders who have nothing to do with education, but have a lot to do with the business of education. So all of these elements come into what is called the education system. It reminds me of almost something like smoking. Smoking was discovered to be something extremely bad decades before the entire world started taking action in it and taking it seriously also. I still remember somewhere in 1998, if I'm not wrong, 98, 99 or 2000, I was actually in an Air France flight, which is 20 years ago, not too far ago. If I tell my own kids, they won't believe me. But in an Air France flight, which is a no smoking flight, its signs are no smoking, and all air hostesses themselves were smoking. They were into a corner. So even though no smoking and all was being talked about, people weren't doing anything about it. I think the education system today is something very similar to that. That people know that marks are not going to solve the problem. People know that just because a child becomes an engineer or a doctor doesn't mean that the child will have a happy life or even have a worthwhile life. There are hundreds and thousands of engineers who are doing way below what an engineer's job should be, and they're not happy. Or even if they're in a job which is paying them well and all of that, that is no equation with happiness at all. And we know that. Despite that, just like we know all the harmful effects of smoking, it took us decades for it to become the taboo it's become now. Now, if you go to many of the countries, you can't even get a smoking room because their entire hotels don't have smoking rooms. I think it will take some time for us also to recognize that the system of education that focuses on marks or focuses on absorption of knowledge is, I think, the wrong system. I think the system that, if I were to say that there were one or two areas, and these are functional training actually, these aren't supposed to be leadership training. So these are functional training. The first functional training, I think, for a leader should be the ability to grasp as much of knowledge as possible in the shortest possible time. So what the kids need to be taught is not to learn a subject. What they should be taught is how to learn something fast. How can we learn something fast? Does it take 4 years to make an engineer, to make him a telecom? Why? I mean, don't you know in your own personal life, don't I know in my own personal life, a roadside mechanic who can fix a car or an engine who has never been to an automotive school better than a person who's been there to an automotive school? So very clearly we see these examples in front of us. We know this model works. We know that when your phone, if it drops down and can't be fixed by the Sony showroom, you take it to a shack on the roadside. That guy will disassemble it and fix it. Where did he learn it? Now, very clearly, that school taught him how to learn something very quickly, very new. Chances are the 18 or 20-year-old, the 30-year-old person who fixes these phones on the roadside, 20 years ago, when the mobile phones actually came, the guy couldn't even have afforded it. But he's figured out, he's got this instrument, he's figured it out.
How to operate that.
Figure it out, right? I mean, you go to YouTube, sometimes, I'm fascinated by looking at some of the business models. There is a channel called Sujata Blouse. Blouse. If you just put Sujata and Blouse, you'll get her. She's got some 6 million followers. And all she does is teach how to stitch a blouse. That's it. Nothing else.
Wow.
With a phone at home, she teaches, and she's got millions of followers. As you know, that's a revenue model and all of that. So very clearly, I think the first skill that kids need to be taught is how to learn quickly.
Wonderful.
The second skill they need to be taught is how to learn multiple things. Learn a little bit about art, learn a little bit about music, learn a little bit about languages. There's a reason for that. The reason is, I think the future is going to be a fusion of things. Let's take an example that I very often like to take, which is a company called Apple. You're all familiar with Apple.
Okay. Yep.
You have Apple products, right?
And now Apple 12 has come. Right.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, Apple, if you ask somebody, what company is Apple? What is the company? And most people say it's a technology company. Why is it a technology company? It makes laptops, makes phones, makes iPads, and therefore it is a technology company. But if you actually look at it, an Apple product is never branded or advertised as a technology product. They never talk about a capacity, the speed of the processor. They talk about it's a beautiful product. It's a thing of beauty. It's a joy to own. And how is that positioning being done? That positioning is being done by a man who, while in Harvard, was fascinated with calligraphy.
Okay.
And because he was fascinated, he was himself very passionate about calligraphy. And because he was passionate about calligraphy, Steve Jobs, he introduced that culture into the environment of Apple. And that's the reason why Apple has got so many fonts, the beautiful fonts. If you see DTP, desktop publishing, anything to do with graphics, anything to do with animation, you see most of the creative people, even if the creative person is a writer or a poet, they will prefer to use a Mac environment because it is much more tuned towards creativity. It's much more easier and designed towards that. And that comes from his practicing. He was a practicing Buddhist. It comes from his Zen philosophy. Zen means everything should be simple. So there is only one button in a phone. There's no battery to be opened. There is nothing you can do with it. It is very simple interface. He brings in people who understand luxury from Burberry, brought in Angela Walcott, who was a very senior number 2 in Burberry, to set up that luxury experience. He brought in Dexter from Gap to set up the retail experience. And when he launches the product, it is like a storytelling, the entire auditorium is waiting with bated breath, and then he opens the envelope, and there's a sound of that envelope opening that has been pre-recorded, and it's through. This is fusion. Samsung can compete against capacity of a hard disk. It can compete against the weight of the phone. It can compete against screen size. But how will it compete against beautiful? How will it compete against a combination of disciplines? So the second thing that children should be taught is to learn many different disciplines. And by the way, when I mean learn, like I said it the other day in that 5th award, the learn doesn't mean they have to go and learn tuition of lessons or French lessons from something. They need to learn by being associated in various different projects. Let them go. I mean, I'll tell you, recently I took my bike for servicing to a local garage. And there I found a boy, 21, 22-year-old boy, who wouldn't fit into a garage. I mean, he spoke to me in fluent English, almost accented English and all of that. And I asked him, you brought your bike in? No, I'm working here. So working here? What are you doing here? He says, I'm doing automotive engineering from one of these engineering schools in Bombay.
Lovely.
But I learned with this mechanic because this mechanic knows more about motorcycles or about engines than my professors ever will know.
Lovely.
That's what I mean by diversity of learning. It doesn't mean that they have to go to pristine tuitions. They need to go into the streets. They need to go into and dirty their hands. And that is the second part of the learning that needs to happen.
Right.
Third, I think a man no less than Jack Ma has said it. Jack Ma has said it. He has said that try and be somewhere in the middle of the class in your merit. Because there is ample time to do other stuff in life. I genuinely believe that parents who set up their children to come first, second, always in life, they are setting up their children for a massive failure in life. I believe so. I'll tell you why I believe that. Because of two reasons. Firstly, what will happen is that child has never ever encountered failure. Why? Because the parents have created an artificial environment of success around the child. Life is not artificial. Life, despite you being the hardest working person, despite you being the best worker, sometimes you will not get promoted, and that is good. It is good because it's preparing you for something else in life, right? It is preparing you to learn a very important lesson in life, that life is not fair.
Correct.
So children who have not been exposed to failure, they will be destroyed when they come into the first failure that they face, because they would not know how to handle it. And secondly, it is also important, not just for children, for everyone to realize that many times a failure is essential in life to divert you from the path that you are going into another path which you are supposed to be shining in anyway.
Exactly.
So I think the third and the last part that I would like to say is that parents must ease off. And I genuinely mean this because I've got a lot of friends who are in the education business, and a lot of friends who are in the medical profession, especially in the mental health space. And I'm actually astounded by the rising number of statistics where children who are under pressure are coming with all sorts of issues, dysfunctional issues that are arising. Entire childhoods are being lost. Recently I saw an ad recently which said about children coding. I know parents are coming at my child, and I'm looking at the guy and saying, this is the time for a child to learn patang kaise udani hai. That teach him about aerodynamics more than what he can ever teach. Coding ke liye time bacha hua hai. But I think this whole environment of advertising, which tells us whether we are looking beautiful, whether we are looking slim, what color is suiting us, whether our skin is good, hair is good. It's also now started telling us whether our child's education is good or not good. And like any advertisement, doesn't cater for the consumer. It caters for the seller of the product. We need to remember that. So I think if parents remembered their duty is to be parents, and parents can only be parents if children are allowed to be children.
Correct.
If children's schedule is like a Microsoft schedule of a parent, then where is the childhood? I think children need a lot of ambiguity in their early stages of development for them to be able to handle an ambiguous routine. If their entire life has been driven by MS project timetable, when they reach real life is not a MS Project timetable. Real life, nothing will happen on time.
That's a lovely analogy you give. Real life is not MS Project timetable. So good. I think some very amazing thoughts here, Captain, and especially when you said, one must learn fast, one must learn multiple things, and one must learn managing failure. Incidentally, we had quite a few questions on that. For example, Vedant, who is working on overcoming ninth grader, working on overcoming depression in people among 14 to 25 years of age, also asked the same question. And similarly, few others also ask that kind of question about failure. But let's move forward now to other areas. And there is a very interesting perspective about the whole nervousness, stress, lack of interest. And I'm just connecting few of the questions which I received. For example, here from an 8th grader who is working on discrimination of girl child is how do you motivate yourself when you are stressed? Or let's say when we look at Srimoy, who is also 9th grader working on a greener world, how can I gain confidence when I feel nervous about anything? I think one of the challenges all of us are facing now is suddenly in this new world, we are feeling, quite a few of us may be feeling that because it's unknown and a new normal, and therefore nervousness or stress of not achieving or not having certain things. You partly gave an answer when you said you be in the middle of the class rather than trying all the time for first, second, and third. Is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of gaining confidence back or managing that scenario of failures, nervousness, stress, and gaining that confidence back? That is also one of the important or one of the important parameters that LEAD propagates out of 4 C's of confidence, collaboration, competence, and character.
So first I want to clarify very carefully the terms that stress is a very, very clearly mental state, right? So that question of saying, how can I motivate myself when I'm under stress? I think there has to be a recognition that stress is it's almost like a illness, and it has to be treated like an illness. So you will never ask the question that how can I work up an appetite when I'm having jaundice? You will not ask that question, because first I have to cure jaundice, and then my appetite will start, because my body is not functioning while I have jaundice, and there's no point in this. So imagine if you told a friend who was having viral fever and he was in bed, come, let's go for a party, come, you will feel better if you come for. The guy is going to think you're nuts. That is the same thing which is true for a child or an adult who is undergoing stress. Stress is an illness. So telling a stressed person, come, let's motivate, let's go and do, it's not going to solve the problem. So I think the first realization we must have is that issues like stress, like depression, like mental health, these are fairly serious issues, very, very serious issues. And I have a feeling that a lot of us don't understand the seriousness of this issue. Because if an 8th grader is working on a project on reducing stress amongst 10 and 14-year-olds, that is a bit like an 8th grader working on a project to reduce heart disease in 50-year-olds. The 8th grader's ability to grasp the nuances of depression as the illness is about the same as her ability to understand the nuances of a heart condition. Having said that, I think I understand the intent from where it is coming. The intent is that this is a serious problem, and even the kids are now beginning to recognize that this is a problem that we need to address. Like, children are now very, very actively, when I speak to children in various different schools, they are working on climate change, they're working on alternate energies, they're working on reduction of pollution and all of that. So very clearly, it means that that generation is conscious that this is going to become a serious problem for us. And to that extent, yes, I understand the 9th or 8th graders' interest in this project. But I would caution all of us, especially the parents and the teachers, that this is not a common cold. This is not a state of mind. Chalo yaar, come on, get up. It's not that. And I think it's extremely serious. It's extremely important for us to recognize that this is as good as somebody having respiratory challenges or someone having cardiac challenges. Is another organ of the body which is malfunctioning, and that's the brain. So I would keep the stress part out of it. I'll want to talk about how a person can rebuild their confidence or gain confidence.
Exactly.
I think a lot of us lose confidence because our confidence has been taken away from us. It's been taken away from us by, in some cases, unfortunately, our own parents, our own teachers, our neighbors, our community, our society. And very slowly we start giving way. When somebody says, you're a duffer, oh, I'm a duffer. You start getting into that. You start accepting that positioning or the labels which other people make for you. My sense is that a child, anyone who is in 18 or below, they have their entire damn life ahead of them. I can be pretty certain that a child who is third grade in college graduation barely manages to skim out of college at passing marks. That child has enough and more time ahead of her to become a success in any career that she chooses. So there is no that if you haven't got into the science stream by the time you are in 11th, then you are a failure. If you haven't got into an Ivy college, then you are a failure. These are all stupid scorecards that have been created actually by the people who benefit from the business of it's almost like pharma companies who keep reducing the margins of health to ensure that medicines can be sold. I don't know if you're aware of that. If 20 years ago, you asked what is the normal blood pressure range, the range was much broader than what it is today because they need to sell those drugs. Human beings have still been the same. I mean, we've been evolving for millions of years, so it can't be that 20 years suddenly the ranges have to be reduced. But very clearly, I mean, I'm using that as an analogy. I'm not saying all companies do it, but I'm saying I'm using that as an analogy that very often these scorecards have been created completely by institutions who benefit from that scorecard, not necessarily the child's life. So I think any kid listening to this, they can take it down in writing. They can write it down, put a date on it, and hold me to it that everything will be okay in the end. 5 years down the line, it'll all be okay. It'll be fine. You will get into the college you were meant to get into. You will find a vocation that you were meant to find. That you will get there. It'll happen or not happen. It doesn't really matter because your worrying about it is not going to make it happen. That is definitely not going to make it. So it is much better to sort of as the this I was just talking yesterday about the kind of leadership that is required in the future, and I think I used a phrase called the gardener leader. And of course, though the session was meant for adult senior leaders, I think is equal for everybody. So why I call that kind of a leadership gardener leadership is like if you've seen a gardener, what is the job of a gardener? The gardener's job is to create the environment where plants will thrive, they will flourish. Correct. A gardener will take care that there is adequate soil, manure, there is adequate distance between the plants so that one plant's growth does not slow down another plant's growth. You remove the pests and the insecticides insects which don't allow the plants to grow, which are there in gardens and also in organizations, the people who will not allow the others to grow. But a gardener knows that there is no point in shouting at a cactus plant. Very rarely will you see a gardener shouting at a cactus plant, "Tu kaisa plant hai? Pura kanta hai. Look at the rose, how beautiful the rose is. Look at the mango tree, it is giving mango, you are giving nothing. He will get promoted, you will get..." Unlikely, because the gardener knows that while a bamboo looks like a sugar cane, you cannot take juice out of a bamboo. And while a sugar cane looks like a bamboo, you cannot build houses with a sugar cane. Now, if that is the kind of leadership that we sort of encourage in our society, where whether it is teachers, whether it's academicians, whether it's parents, they allow each plant to grow at their own pace. You cannot shout a plant to grow faster. No, is it possible? Every day shout to the plant. I mean, of course, there are some theories that if you talk to plants, that they tend to grow fast. But even then, it is good talking. You can't shout at a plant to make it grow fast.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think if that kind of leadership is adopted and people realize, it's not even adoption of that leadership, it's a realization that this is the only form of leadership that will work.
Correct.
If you took a bunch of 10 creative people in an innovation department of, let's say, a startup, correct, and one day the CEO goes and asks them, "Ki kitna tumne patent banaya abhi tak?" "Sir, 6 months we have made 2 patents." "But only 2 patents? In next 3 months, if you don't take out 6 patents, I'll fire all of you." You think it will inspire the creativity? You think that will happen? Right? So very clearly, I think we are moving away. I think this is a recognition all of us need to have, parents, teachers, students. We are moving away from an industrial era of mechanistic tasks, where you became a bricklayer, a plumber, an engineer, a doctor, where there's a templatized series of jobs that you did, and that job ensured that you will have a vocation, you will have a salary. Today, it has moved away from mechanistic to creative. There is no way for a to benchmark two copywriters. Both write English, both have been educated well. One copywriter earns in crores, the other copywriter is looking for a job. How can you compare these two? What is the benchmark?
True.
He will show you कि मैं भी सेंट स्टीफेंस किया था, मैंने भी इंग्लिश लिटरेचर किया, मैंने भी ये किया, बल्कि ये मेरे से अच्छा कॉपीराइटर है. He may not even have done that. How can you identify who is going to be a better singer, or a better graphic artist, or a better person on YouTube to teach how to stitch a blouse than the best tailor in India?
True, very true.
Will earn per blouse that he stitches, whereas a woman who's teaching how to stitch blouses earns without making any blouses, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
This understanding is what we need to start inculcating in leadership. That get a gardener leadership, allow plants to grow at their own pace, and just make sure you're removing the insects, you're removing distractions, you're removing weeds from your gardens, which are going to cause a negative influence. I think if we did that, my sense is that our confidence, our ability to say that in the end everything will be okay, it will be fine.
Yeah, I think Captain, you said very, very important aspect about nurturing leadership from the gardener's lens, and I think that's a brilliant way. I will now keep quoting this gardener leadership in many other conversations that I generally have. Moving on to something very, very, very important that is happening right now in our society, and this is about women in general. This is about females. Incidentally, Anushka, a ninth grader, is working on some such topic, and she is in fact the whole question, I would say, not just to look at one aspect of respecting the woman, but also the larger picture. What do you think? How should we handle this issue of giving space to women in the society, creating a society which is equal for men and women, and creating a society wherein women feel as safe as they should be feeling? What is your, because these are young generation leaders and they must, they are the future of our society. What advice you would give to them? In fact, if I may add just what Pradyuman said when he talked as part of his project on smashing patriarchy and conservative mindset, and he said that whenever we talk about social cause, why are we not addressing things to teenagers, because they can bring up change easily? So this goes along. How do we? Yeah, go ahead.
Not only should we address social cause to teenagers because they can bring about changes more easily, but I think we should allow them to take a lead in those changes, because the changes affect them directly. I mean, how many years you and I have got left? Ironically, most countries are being led by people who have less than a decade to live, and they are being asked to take decisions on decades of livelihood that will have to happen later. It's an irony. It's truly an irony. Now, if you look at it from that perspective, it's very easy to understand that it is the young leaders of the future who should be taking the important decisions of the future. It stands to reason. It really stands to reason. Now, coming back to your original point, and I want to couple it with social change, I think what happens is that with every generation, there are a lot of changes that happen in the social values. There is no doubt about that. Having said that, I am a firm believer that unless and until a society is shown why it is important to economically and existentially do something, it is unlikely to get done. Just because it is nice to do, just because it is good to do. I'll give you a very simple example. Then like it'll be easier for me to. So I'm sure all of us know, and of course you, Samir bhai, will definitely know about Vastu. And I know that in Gujarat it's a big deal, Vastu. So I was taught by somebody how Vastu started, and Vastu basically began. I must credit that the gentleman also. He was a joint secretary who worked with me, Mr. Iyengar, who was very, very knowledgeable in these kind of things. So he told me that Vastu begins with Nagarwastra. And why Nagarvastu? Because all cities, all civilizations begin on the bank of a flowing river. Otherwise, civilization cannot begin. You take any civilization, it has to. That's why it's called the Indus Valley civilization or the Nile civilization, because it has to be along a river. Now, when houses are being built on the bank of a river, they need to follow certain rules. Because your water wastage cannot become my drinking water. So your sewage cannot come into my drinking water. And so there are certain rules which are laid. And fundamentally, there are these three rules. The first rule is the sewage water, making sure that your sewage water does not go back into the drinking water. The second is the sunlight, because in certain parts of your house, you need sunlight. And in certain other parts of your house, like the larder or where you store food and all of that, you need dampness. And the air, the wind that is flowing through, because you cannot create a wall which will prevent the wind from going to your neighbor's house. Now, these rules were formulated, and they were formulated using myths and stories. And you said, okay, this is the corner of the god. In Kerala, it's called the Deva Mula, the corner of the god where nothing else can be placed, only God can be placed. And therefore, if somebody did something there and some mishap happened in the family, they would connect it to say a Vastu ka problem. Now, these rules were framed for a larger cause. They were framed for a cause to say that we need the entire civilization to live all around the river, and they need to expand. And if our society has to expand, these rules have to be followed. Now, they may have been built in with Vastu and with superstition. They may have been embedded into our heads with stories, ki aisa nahi karoge to waisa ho jayega, waisa nahi karoge to aisa ho jayega. But the core reason behind it is a social, existential reason. If you don't do that, the society will collapse. People will start getting typhoid and diseases and plague, and they will die, as it has happened in many cities which have collapsed, like London collapsed, Surat collapsed at one point of time, and the vermin of that city, which were under control until then, they took over, and then the entire city had to implode, and drastic measures have to be taken. It's a very good metaphor of explaining how when social values cross a certain limit or social disvalues, it will collapse the whole society. Now, I want to take an example of two cities. Let's take an example of Delhi and let's take an example of Bombay. Now, it's a well-known fact that Bombay is definitely safer for young women or single women or working women than Delhi is. Everybody knows that. Do you imagine the entire talent pool that is not available to Delhi? It's just not available to Delhi. An entire talent pool is not available to Delhi. So the Delhi's corporate Inc. is paying a much higher price because 50% of the talent pool is not, I'm oversimplifying it, but I'm saying 50% of the talent pool is not available to them. Which city will eventually be more richer, more flourishing? It has been scientifically proven, statistically shown that any society where the women's participation in the workforce increases by 10%, the GDP shoots up. One thing we need to do in this country to take the GDP almost to a 3-4 digit increase, maybe more, is just increase the infusion of women in the workforce. And by that I mean value women in the workforce, not we have in theory 50%, 40% of our women in the workforce because we show all these farm women who work in the farm as workers. That's not the point I'm talking. I'm talking about the higher value chain workforce. Now, if a society has to understand the financial drain that it is causing us, that nearly 50% of our workforce is not able to work in a free environment, and how much it is going to cost us socially, economically, from a GDP, then women's security becomes a very important point. And I'll tell you this reason. By the way, this is nothing new. If you go back and actually study the advent of the supermarket, why did the supermarkets originate? And by the way, supermarkets first called convenience stores, supermarkets, they first originated in the US. And the reason why they originated in the US was, for the first time during the Second World War, there was a price to a woman's time because women had to work in factories to do the war production. So until then, women never went to work. If you looked at movies of that era, you'll find that the women in US were mostly housewives. They were housewives handling the home. And so after the housewife has sent her husband to work and all, if she has to go to a butcher, then she goes to a butcher, then to a baker, then to a tailor, and to a plumber, because her time really had no value. But the moment she started working, even if she was drawing factory wages, her time now had a value, and therefore supermarkets had to open up where she could just go into one market, buy the 50 things that she needed, and come out. So it has to be made existential. This realization that we need to treat women and provide them with a safe environment is not because we worship women, not because they are our mother. It has to be because if as a country, as a society, we want to be competitive in the world, how can you compete? Even I gave you example of 2 cities. How can you compete against a country which allows a far more liberal and a far more safe environment for 50% of their workforce, which is today strangulated, to work in the full optimal way? I know you, I'm sure you also know, I'm aware of so many cases of children, girl children, who have cleared IIT, and their parents have not been comfortable in sending them from, say, a city like Ludhiana to study in Delhi by themselves. Can you imagine the national loss that would have happened had that girl gone, become an engineer? Forget about a girl, even if it is a guy. But a person not becoming engineer, not becoming the next Sundar Pichai, not creating the next generation of better educated children, that is the national loss that happens because of every eve teasing and every rape. That's the national loss which happens. So unless we as a society realize that creating an unsafe environment for women is stifling 50% of our workforce from rendering their full potential, and therefore it literally like, if you need 2000 calories every day to eat and you're given a meal of 2000 calories, it's literally like taking away half of that meal and throwing it into the dump every day, and then saying that you still should be nutritious. It's not going to happen. So unless we connect the country's economic growth and hard couple it with the ability of every single individual, regardless of their gender, to be able to work freely, to move freely, to be an entrepreneur freely, I don't think we will be able to do much. All these things about, Women's Safety Act and this app and that app and, a special cell and a special desk and a special helpline, I don't see crime against women reducing. It's not reduced. I think unless we connect it to the economic growth of the country, that realization will not come.
Correct. There are, in fact, since we are coming towards an end, we have about 8 more minutes to go. I'm now shifting the direction and a very important inputs that you gave for women's safety. And as a society, there is a need for us to realize the humongous loss that we have from all spheres when we don't create that kind of environment. And I think as teenagers and the educators, they have a huge role to play. And I think the new education policy that is also being framed has touched some of these aspects of creating that kind of ethical leadership. Important aspect or quite a few questions we have received from your own life. And the question like, for example, Siddhi, who is working on Osana, is asking, what is your motto for life? Or someone else has asked is about explain, how do you connect with people around you when Esha is working on shaping our minds? Or there is a very interesting question, but it is also pertaining to, although it is talking about leadership in general, but I would encourage you to share based on your reflection, your own experience when they who is working on We Will End Bullying is saying that what is that one thing that makes the people at top or the leaders or the ethical leaders different and better. So maybe, last 5-8 minutes, it would be a good idea if you can reflect on your, own journey and how do you feel that, quite a few questions about how you could motivate and inspire so many people. So I think that would be...
I, as a rule, do not like to talk about my journey and all of that, because for the simple reason, as I mentioned, I lead also.
Yeah, I'm aware, right.
It's a pointless having a role model. Please don't do that. Never have a role model. It doesn't work. And more importantly, I want to give a caveat up front that suppose I give you like this, aisa karo, vaisa karo, and all of that, you could turn around and ask me, are you doing it yourself? And my answer would be probably not. So
Correct.
my first advice to you would be, as it says in a holy book, do what the priest tells you to do. Don't do what the priest does. So even if I give you some advice, please do that advice because it is good advice, and don't bother whether I am doing it or not doing it. That's a different issue. So
Right.
I think I want to take the last one first because it has to be, some elements have to be clarified. I think we always look for that one thing in a great leader, or three things in a great athlete, or four things in a great thinker. I don't think a great leader or a good leader or a good. Firstly, let's not confuse the great leader being the one on top. That is not necessarily a great leader.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
I think a great leader is a person who people want to follow from their heart, not because they have to follow out of fear. So that, to my mind, is not a leader. That is a, I mean, you can't assault your followers into leadership. You can't hit your people and say, I am a leader. That is not a leader. So don't confuse these two things, that the one who is at top is a good leader. Not necessary.
Correct.
Sometimes it is, but not always. And the person who is a good leader is definitely has to be the top. That also is not necessary. You can be a great leader in your own environment, and you can, in your own environment, if you're shaping something and making it happen, you're a great leader there. So that's fine. That's not a problem at all. So there is no one thing which can actually make a leader great. It is like, tell me one thing that will make a great Gujarati meal. How can you give one thing? Give one thing. It has to be a mix of several things. It has to be, the ingredients have to be fresh, the flavors have to be just right, the cook needs to have, and it has to be cooked with a little bit of passion and love in it. That's what makes the meal great. So similarly, when you say a leader is good or great, there is no one magic, masala which you can put into that leader and make that person great.
Wonderful.
By and large, there are certain principles which, ideally you should have as many of them as possible. But even if you have 4 or 5 out of the 6 or 7, I think you are on your journey, and it's a constant journey. A leader who is good at a certain level may not be very good at another level. A leader who is good in one situation, he may be very good, may not be very good in another situation. So these are all a bit like who is the best cricket player in the world. You really don't know, because it depends on which way you look at it. If you look at it from a batsman point, you look at it from a team builder point, you look at it from a captain point. These are all very different. So similarly, leadership is it's a broad ocean, and therefore don't look for one island in that ocean. That will be misleading. Whether I tell you or somebody else tells you, it's complete stupidity. The second is that what it works for me may not work for you. It just may not work for you because you are a different person. You are in a different situation. Having said that, I just want to share on some basic principles which I have found are good in leaders. And the only test I have to demonstrate that these qualities are necessary qualities or good qualities for leaders is, if you had a leader, you would want these qualities in that leader. You would want the leader to be authentic. Genuinely tell you whatever it is. Authentic doesn't mean that the leader has to be good. Authentic means the leader has to be who the leader is. Leader has to say, this is who I am. But this is what I'm good at, or this is. But an authentic leader, not a leader who, Secondly, he has to be, or she has to be somebody who is relatable, which means that the person has to be vulnerable. If that person is a Superman, I can do everything and you cannot do anything, I know everything, you don't know anything, people can't relate with that leader. They cannot relate. The leader's job is to inspire. So I'll ask you a very simple question. Suppose your college had an opportunity to call 2 people to address you. One was a person who began his life in the slums of Malwani and is today worth, let's say, 500 crores. He's worth 500 crores. He's created a business which has become 500 crores. The second person, let's say, is Mukesh Ambani, who is worth, 140 billion. Who would you relate with more? Who would you listen to more and say, if this person can do it, I can also do it? Who will you relate with more? And suddenly you will find that it is not necessarily the richest person or the tallest man or the fastest bowler or the fastest race driver who needs to become your role model. The person who needs to become your role model is somebody who was at where you were and is now a few orbits above. That role model, if you follow, you're more likely to be able to take that path. So by that logic, if you look at leaders, you need them to be authentic. You need them to be relatable, real to you. You need them to be caring about you, genuinely caring about you, right? So that is why we take a lot of nonsense from our parents, because we know genuinely they care about us. At the end of the day, they care about us. So that is an essential quality. And to a certain extent, I would say the leader is able to teach you or to encourage, the gardener leader is able to encourage you to or create an environment which allows you to go to your full potential. I think those are the traits that will make a good leader. But don't look for one trait. There is no one single magic bullet for anything in life, for nothing.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I think the common things that you talked about, authenticity, relatable, I think, and the relation part, there's something where I can resonate with those kind of leaders, and I think that's where we need to learn, and that's what all our young friends need to also imbibe and practice. That I know there are several questions constantly coming on the, not just on the chat, but also there are quite a few which I could not also ask. But friends, to be very frank, we cannot address all 100% questions. And there are some very nice questions. For example, I have multiple options to choose and I just want to choose one option. Yeah.
What I would suggest, Samir bhai, is that normally after a session like this, my Twitter handle is @Capt Raman. I can put it on the chat or put it there.
Sure.
And if the kids just tweeted to that handle the question, then I'll answer it, because then it'll help everybody else as well. So
right, I think that's a good part, and I'm just writing on the chat. It's @CAPTRAMN, correct?
That's right.
Right. And I think that's if one can send their questions on this Twitter handle, you are directly in touch with Captain. You can get all your answers. You don't need to come through LEAD. You don't need to go through Samir Pari. You don't need to go through LEAD Awards only. You can, and all the time. It is not just only when we are having this session. You can keep seeking answers to some of the questions. I must say, Captain, this was very insightful from 2-3 perspectives, the entire session, because it talked about, when we talked of skills, it did not talk about any regular skill sets. It talks about the speed of learning and the span of learning, the width of learning. I think such useful insight for our educators and parents also, that encourage your kids to acquire skill sets. May not be, I mean, it is okay for him to be at the middle of the that entire scale, and not necessarily all the time 1, 2, and 3, because if we create that kind of
because you use a phrase which is inaccurate. If he is in the middle of his class, then only he'll be generally in the top of everything else, because we have suddenly decided that the entire scale means only class. That's not true.
True,
the entire
very true.
I mean, the child also has to be physically fit. The child also has to have 4 or 5 sports that he or she has played, so that understands what team spirit is about. The child has to have had some travel that they have done. They need to have done some party also. So all of that, if you find, that is where I'm saying that in academics, if the child is in the middle, they'll be generally okay.
Perfect. Thanks for correcting me on that. And very important part of gardener leadership. I think that was something new that we got today. And that is something which each one of us can practice. I think that is going to help us like anything. And yes, the last part of being authentic, look for somebody with whom you can relate, the relatable part, and the caring part, and the affection, the warmth that one needs to demonstrate as a leader. I think these are some of the very useful insights that you gave. Friends, we are, because, okay, let me just ask one question, and I forgot who asked that in the chat, but that was a good question. What can make us happy? Or how do we derive happiness? I think it, and I'm sorry, Captain, although it has to get over, I'm just stealing your 5 more minutes, and if you don't mind, please address, how do we, from where do we derive?
And there are many ways to be happy, many ways to be happy, but I'll give you a very simple shortcut to be happy.
Yeah.
If you want to be instantaneously happy, this is the formula I follow. Go to a hospital, just visit a hospital, or pay attention when you are driving past a pavement. Look at the people living in the pavement, and just realize that but for a lottery of life, you could have been there and they could have been in you. In case of a hospital, you can by today evening also. So if you just look at somebody who is struggling for something that you have sort of taken for granted, even if it is the ability to breathe air, even if it is the ability to walk on your, whatever it is, that ability, I think you'll become happy like this instantaneously. Because I think we constantly unhappy when we compare ourselves to people who have things, at least material things, which we don't have. You have no idea whether he's happy or not. That's a different issue.
Yeah, that's
You may not know he's a cocaine addict and he's like half his lungs are fried up, and you may not know that. That's
I agree. I agree.
It's much easier to feel happy when you look at people who don't have what you have. You will feel happy.
Correct. So thanks a lot, Captain. Once again, many thanks. I want to also thank sponsors for LEAD Awards and LEAD programs in general, because they work with close to 5,000 to 10,000 students every year who are working with schools run by local municipal corporations and rural schools. And without the support from Polycab, Alicon, Swordglass, and Hotel Express, which has been happening for last almost 5 years, our team would not have been able to work with so many students, which happens every year. And yes, friends and all those who are in the audience, please feel free to join next Mentopine sessions, which are taking place in upcoming Mentopine sessions on 20th October and 30th October. And they keep discussing a lot of interesting topics which are relevant for young generation and for parents and educators. Also, you can come forward to share your thoughts as a mentor on the Mentopine session and reach out to LEAD team for such interesting discussions. And the whole idea is, and Captain, I'm sure you would agree with me, the whole idea through this entire initiative is, if we can create a society, or if we can contribute, not create, I think we are too small to create, but we can contribute in some ways of influencing mindset of people across the levels, across ages, across generations. And if we can create better living for all of us, I think that's what we at the end of the day need to look at in terms of our contribution. Once again, many thanks, Captain. Many thanks for joining and sparing your time, your wisdom, your experience. I feel like continuing this for hours together. But yes, I know I'm indeed delighted. We are delighted that you agreed for sparing this time with all of us and all these young students and hundreds of them who joined here on this set. Friends, the recording will be available immediately after this on the same platform, and also thereafter through LEAD. And also there are lots and lots of such inspirational talks that Captain Raman has delivered, and they are available on YouTube. If you go on YouTube, there are several such you will discover, including the one he delivered at the time of his LEAD Awards, when 700 plus audience listened to him for a good 1 hour. So thank you very much, Captain Raman, and thank you all. I'm Samir Parikh signing off from LEAD side on behalf of Drumit, Shivani, Siddhi, Dipti, and Shambhavi and entire Naman team. Thank you very much. Thanks, Shardul, as well. Thank you.